DJ Crystal Clear here with you on this Thursday, August 4th. It's 3:07, and it's time for the latest edition of What's the Word, the radio broadcast that brings you news of our Area 1 community. I'm Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford, and now here's the host of What's the Word, Mr. Frank Fisher of the USAG Red Cloud and Area 1 Public Affairs Office.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of What's the Word. Well, America's presidential election campaign has recently passed through one of its most important stages. The major political parties have held their nominating conventions, and they've chosen their candidates for president. Next, the election year enters another key stage, and that's the presidential and vice presidential debates. They're scheduled for September and October, and that period of debates amounts really to the final run-up to Election Day itself, which this time falls on Tuesday, November 8th. That's just about 3 months away. And I don't have to tell you how fast 3 months can rush by. So we're devoting today's edition of What's the Word to making sure you know the 2 easy steps to getting registered. Registering to vote allows you to exercise one of the most important responsibilities you and I have as citizens of the United States, and that's voting for those who will be entrusted to govern our country. Choosing our leaders by casting our vote is in fact so important, such a big deal for our nation, that today's broadcast is not the first, but the third we've done on this subject in the past 10 months. And that's because we've wanted to remind you and remind you again so that you remember to register in time. And we'll tell you where in Area 1 you'll find help getting registered, and helping us bring you the word on all of that today is our guest. He's Mr. Bob Clifton. He's the Civilian Misconduct Officer with the U.S. Army Garrison Red Cloud and Area 1's Directorate of Human Resources. We'll hear a lot from him in the course of the broadcast, especially in the segments after this one. We'll also hear from him in this segment. But first, I want to take a few moments to talk a little more about why I say that registering to vote is so important. Just what's the big deal? Well, there are lots of reasons. For one, the person who wins office, think about it, has a big effect on your life and can affect the country's future in ways that can last for generations. When you go to the voting booth and choose candidates, you're choosing people whose actions may affect you and any children you may have, but their actions may have consequences that are so far-reaching, good or bad, that they even affect your grandchildren and their children too. And by the way, the person who's elected president also becomes commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The president and members of Congress can affect whether we go to war. The decisions of elected officials can affect what happens to the economy, and that can affect what kinds of, just as one example, what kinds of jobs are out there and how easy or tough it might be to get work and have an income. Also, when you elect a president or members of Congress, or people to state or city offices for that matter, the people who hold those offices have a big effect on what laws get passed or don't get passed. And that's whether it's at the national, state, or local level. But beyond all those important reasons, there's something else about voting. The fact that we Americans are extremely fortunate to be able to even make a choice as to who will govern us. Many places in the world know what it is to suffer under dictatorship. You know what I'm talking about. No free speech, can't say what you really think or feel if it's not what the ruling dictatorship wants. No freedom of assembly, no freedom of travel. And in some places, they let you go through the motions of voting, but they make sure the election is rigged to keep them in power no matter what happens at the polling place. Yeah, open your mouth and speak against them, and you disappear. Well, no dictatorship chooses who will lead our country. We, the people, do. Mr. Clifton, first off, just who is eligible to vote?
United States citizens 18 years or older. So that's your, Oconus soldiers, civilians, contractors, and their family members.
And what are the advantages we have about a minute left in this segment, what are the benefits to getting registered as soon as possible?
Yeah, ideally we'd like to have people register right at January or whenever or after they move, but 90 days prior is key, and we are there, 94 days away from our general election, so if you're a procrastinator like myself, it's time to stop being a procrastinator and get on board and do what you have to do.
That's a very key point, and it is, as we were saying earlier, 3 months can go by very, very quickly.
Yeah, we're all busy, I understand.
Right, right. So, 18 or older. You
18
have to
or
be
older,
18.
U.S. citizens.
U.S. citizen.
Correct.
All right. Well, we'll be back after the break.
And here's Ariana Grande with Into You on AFN. We're back with the What's the Word Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again. And today on What's the Word, we're talking about how to register to vote if you're here in Area 1. We're talking about this with Mr. Bob Clifton of Area 1's Directorate of Human Resources. Mr. Clifton, I know that from earlier broadcasts we've done on this subject that for members of our overseas military communities, there are two main steps they have to take to be able to vote. Let's start with the first one. Just tell us, how do we register?
Okay. The first thing you got to do is you got to get a federal postcard application, or the FPCA. And you may wonder, how do I get one of those? Well, it's very simple. If you log into www. and it's FVAP, which stands for Federal Voting Assistance Program.gov, you can do it online. And it's very simple. You click on the state, and it'll push you right through the instructions. But you'll also need the ability to print, and then you'll have to sign it, and you would have to have the ability to make a PDF copy of that if you wanted to send it in via email or fax. And that's for states that offer the email or the fax opportunities. Some do not. So the other way to go about it is just to come see one of the installation voting assistance officers, and or maybe your unit voting assistant officer, and we can let you know who that is too if you contact us. But the most important thing is you got to act. You got to get your federal postcard application in and sent to the state of your residence.
Let me recap that to be sure that I'm following it. It was, I think, very clear the way you laid it out. There's something called a federal postcard application, and if I've understood correctly, one can find this online and fill it out online. And then you take the electronic card, and either you can email it to the appropriate place, or you can fax it. You'd print it out, I presume. You'd have to print it out to fax it. Am I correct?
Correct. You'd print that out, and there's also a postage-paid envelope that you can print out as well.
Mm-hmm.
The reason it's got to be printed out and can't be just sent electronically through the system is it must be signed.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to print it out, sign it, and then put it in the envelope and mail it off if the state only allows for mail-ins. But if they allow fax, you can fax it in, and then some allow email. So if you can make a PDF of it, you can send it in that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But again, you'd have to go online and see, or talk to one of the installation voting assistance officer or unit voting officers, and we can look up in our book and we can find out what that state requirements are.
Right. And am I correct that if one goes to this website, and I'll repeat in a moment what it is, you can find a button, a link to your state. You can look for your state by name, click on that, and it'll tell you those things. Am I correct?
That's absolutely right. It's just a drop-down menu. Soldiers these days, they got their phones. They do everything
they
online.
Do everything.
So
that's right.
They would manage the site very, very well.
No doubt.
If I can get through it as old as I am, anybody can.
Sure. That web address, again, is www.fvap. Phonetically, that's Foxtrot, Victor, Alpha, Papa. Once more, Foxtrot, Victor, Alpha, Papa. And what about the second and critically important phase of this, the absentee ballot?
Right. And what happens is once you send it to the state takes it, processes it, identifies who you are, and then they send you the federal, they send you your ballot. And because we're so close now, I just want to stress the fact that any time after you send your federal postcard application, you can follow that up. If you haven't received anything in a week or 2 weeks, if you're mailing, it's going to take longer than 2 weeks. But if you do email and fax and you don't receive something in a week or two, you can follow that right up with your federal write-in absentee ballot, which is your FWAB. And you can vote, sign that, and send that off to ensure that you have an opportunity and your voice is heard.
Now, that's a very important thing, and I had forgotten about that, and I'm glad you're reminding our audience about that. So, yes, you can, once they've registered you can expect them to mail to you an absentee ballot that you fill out and send back to them. However, if it's not playing out the way you're expecting, you can, right here in Area 1, get a form, an absentee ballot form of a slightly different kind, fill it out and send it in.
Yeah, absolutely. You can fill out the form. Again, you got to sign it, and you vote, and then we put it in a sealed envelope, and it goes back off to your state to be counted.
And where does one get that particular absentee ballot form?
Yeah, again, all the installation voting assistance officers have those. There's 2 of them here. Later we'll provide that information.
Good.
And then unit voting assistance officers, we have their names and for what units they work for. So again, when I give the contact information later, we can always provide that as well.
Good, good. And the Garrison, the help, there is help available from the Garrison. It's, as you were just saying, it's not only on the website, but it's from the installation voting assistance officer and so on. Where do people go? Who do they contact if they want that help?
Okay, yeah, there's 2 of us right here. We have a primary and an alternate installation voting assistance officer. The primary is Mr. Deloney. He works in the on Camp Casey. He's at the MPD office, which is upstairs in the Mod Hall. You just follow the big sign that says MPD, ask for Mr. Deloney, say you want some voting assistance, and they'll direct you right to him, and he can take care of you. And then, unfortunately, I didn't bring his phone number, but we can follow that up. And then I'm the other one. I'm the alternate. I'm working on Camp Red Cloud. I'm in building 611, which is the ID card, ration card office. I'm in room 101, and my phone number is 732-6762. That's 732-6762, and I have all the stuff and all the forms there too. And we've got the ability to. We can't fax, but we can scan and make a PDF if need be, or any other. We can print off the envelopes and everything else. So we have everything we can to service the customer.
Right. So just to recap that, there were 2 places, and one of them is at Camp Casey in
Correct.
Maud Hall. And did you say that's on the 2nd floor?
2nd floor, yes.
It's called MPD.
Yes, military
Mike Papa Delta.
Right, military personnel division.
Right, and they would ask for Mr. Deloney.
Mr. Deloney.
Right, whose phone number is 732-6762. 732-6762. And then Mr. Clifton, our guest today, is at Camp Red Cloud. And tell us again, please, where people can find you.
Building 611, which is the Ration Control ID card office, room 101.
Okay. I know that you spent a career in the Air Force, and we have a little less than a minute, but I'm just wondering, maybe we can hear more about it in an upcoming segment. Did you have this kind of, when you were a very young airman, were these kinds of services available to you?
You know, it's funny you mentioned that. Yeah, there was always a little bit of awareness for voting, but nothing like you see today. It's become, I think, going back to about 2004, they had a DAIG audit over here in Korea about how voting was being processed and how the awareness was moving, and we weren't doing a good job. And so I think you've seen a significant improvement over the last 12, 14 years. Yes.
Right. That's my impression, too. Well, we're back after the break.
And I'll be right back with your weather, exchange rate, and gas prices. We're back with What's the Word Hour, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. We're talking today about how to register to vote. Our guest is Mr. Bob Clifton of Area 1's Directorate of Human Resources. Mr. Clifton, there are some mistakes that people can make if they want to vote, and one of them we know is that some people might assume that because they had registered to vote in an earlier election that they don't need to contact the voting authorities in their state to do it again because they're good to go. What do you want to tell people about that?
Well, yeah, you know, those in the military and those of us who support the military, we move. You know, we move frequently when we go where the mission dictates. And so what happens, it's like anything. You know, sometimes, you know, the system has a hard time catching up with us. So basically what we have to do if we want to hear our voice to be heard is we've got to raise our hand and let them know, hey, I've moved here. I mean, this is where I'm at now. And you might have heard me say earlier, that's why we say we would like to see, you know, by January of every year, people submit their federal postcard application and or every time when they move. And we say that because that way the state officials can keep up on the constantly moving machine that is the military. So, yeah, that's a very, very important piece of it. Is if you haven't received anything now, then you're probably, they don't know where you're at to get a hold of you. So now is the time to submit your federal postcard application and get moving, because we're 4 days outside of that 90-day window.
And one of the things that we should remind our audience of is that the rules on voting vary from state to state. So what might go in one state might not apply in another state.
Correct. Yeah, there's different rules that apply and different requirements for each respective state, and you find that out by either coming to one of us at the Installation Voting Assistance Office or your unit voting assistance officer, or you go online at a website, www.vap.gov, and you click on your state, and it's very easy, and it'll tell you exactly what the requirements are, and they're fairly simple. Like I said, it's going to say whether they only accept mail, they accept mail and fax, or they accept mail, fax, and digital copy through email.
And that web address, by the way, just to say it one more time, is www.fvap, Foxtrot Victor Alpha Papa, FVAP, www.gov. Thank you, .gov.
And it stands for Federal Voting Assistance Program. That's what it stands for.
And so if somebody wants to, let's just say this again for people, if somebody is not sure what their state rules are, if they want to make sure, then they can either ask an installation voting assistance officer here in Area 1, or they can go to that website and find, is this correct, find their state, click on it, and see what it says?
Yes, yeah. It's very easy to go on the website and just check that out. You don't need a password. You don't need anything. You can use your smartphone, go right on there, look it up, and it'll tell you exactly what you need to do. But again, Mr. Deloney, myself, and the unit voting assistance officer, we'd love to see you. We're here to support you, and in any way, shape, or form. So for your voting needs. So just if you want to give us a call, or if you want to just come by our offices, we can look it up, and we have all the equipment to do what you need to do.
And just in case someone might not know the difference, what is the difference between the installation voting assistance officer and what you've been referring to as the unit, what were you calling it? The
unit voting assistance officer.
The unit voting assistance officer.
Well, basically, there's just like anything in the military. There's a hierarchy, and we're the ones that set up. The installation voting assistance officers. We kind of assist the unit voting assistance officers, and we work with the Army voting assistance officers, and we ensure that all the unit voting assistance officers receive their training, and the most important, they have the ballots, and they have all the stuff that they need to help. All the resources to help the soldiers and the service members and all the family members, contractors, and civilians, so they can vote.
And thinking back to the days when I was a soldier, I take it that when we say unit voting assistance officer, then if I'm a soldier, I can go to my unit, find out who that person is, and he or she is there to help get me registered. Is that right?
Absolutely. If they stop by the RES1, I'm very certain the RES1 can point them in the right direction and tell them who in their organization is their unit voting assistance officer, and they'll all be willing to assist.
And at the same time, if someone, let's say a soldier, were to come to you or Mr. Deloney, then you'd be as ready to help them as one of the active duty unit voter registration officers would be. Am I right?
Absolutely. We can look up and find out who their unit voting assistance officer. But if they're there and they're in my office, I'm just going to take care of them anyway.
Of course,
so, yeah.
Sure. And what about the risks of waiting much longer before getting this process started? You've been emphasizing that through the broadcast. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, we're there. I mean, we're 4 days shy of the 90-day window, and if you wait too much longer, you run the risk of not having your voice heard. And I'd hate to be one of those people that you just procrastinated too long, and then the election happens. And like you said, this is a very serious election with serious repercussions. So I advise everyone to, if you haven't done so now, get with your UVAs or your IVAO, or go online and register to vote.
Thanks. We're back after the break.
And we're back with What's the Word, and here's Frank Fisher.
Thanks, Sergeant Crawford. Hello again, and if you're just joining us, we've been talking today about how to register to vote if you're here in Area 1. And Mr. Clifton is going to just recap some things that are worth repeating from some of what he's been telling us today. Go ahead, Mr. Clifton.
Okay, yeah, just to recap, basically what we're saying is we're at that deadline. We're 4 days outside the 90-day window. So it's time to, register and request your absentee ballot. And you do that by your federal postcard application and sending that into your state. Now, what are the requirements for your state? Well, we can help you with that. Or you can go online to, again, at www.fvap.gov and just click on the state, and it'll have all the information you need to know on how to register to vote. Or, again, you can get with the Installation Voting Assistance Officers, which is Mr. Deloney, and he works at Maud Hall on Camp Casey, and that is upstairs in the MPD. Just ask for Mr. Deloney. His hours for operation for voting are 0800 1530. Or you can come, if you're on Red Cloud or at Stanley, you can come to CRC, and you can see Mr. Clifton, that's myself, and I'm in this building 611, which is the Ration Control and ID Car office, room 101, and I'll be glad to assist you. Again, my hours for the voting assistance stuff is about the same, 0800 to 1530. Sometimes I'm out of the office because there's other jobs that I'm doing, but for the most part, I'm there daily, and if I'm not, somebody in that building will be able to assist. So those are the main things. Right now it's time to get registered. There's no more waiting. If you want your voice to be heard, it's time to activate.
And so people have about 3 months left, or is it really 3 months, or would it be more like 2.5? What's the sort of the drop dead on this?
Yeah, it varies from state to state, but they're generally around the middle of October. 11 October to maybe 18 October are their dates for the general election and getting the absentee ballots in. These are done by hand, so it's a slower process, and they need those things. They need your vote in early. So we are at crunch time. So I can't stress enough that if you haven't registered and or you thought your absentee ballot would have come to you by now, chances are that state does not know how to get a hold of you, and it's time for you to reach out and wave to them so you can be seen.
And this would be especially true, I think, of people who are in the military, because they do tend to move every year, 2 years, whatever it is. Residences change, and that can mean that the voting authorities don't know where they are.
I mean, look at it this way. I mean, we move a lot, and how many times have you had even just billing companies that can't find you after you move on? And and if you've been gone for more than 1 year, United States Postal Service, they only forward your mail for up to 1 year. So if you've been gone for more than 1 year, whatever you think should come in the mail or should be forwarded, it's no longer being forwarded.
And let's remind our listeners that what we're talking about is really a two-step process. Again, as you've been saying, the rules vary from state to state, but what it boils down to, if you're a member of the military community, active duty or civilian, overseas, is that you need to register with the voting authorities in your state, and you need to send in a so-called absentee ballot.
Correct. That's it. And again, if you send in your federal postcard application, and any time after that, if you're worried about the time constraints, you can come in and fill out a federal write-in absentee ballot and send that in right behind, and not wait for them to send you the ballot, meaning your state to send you the ballot. If you want to go ahead and do that, you can, and that way your vote will be heard.
And as you've pointed out earlier in the broadcast, the trigger for all of this, what sets everything in motion, is the registration. First, you get registered, and then they will send you an absentee ballot that you fill out and send back. Or, as you just said a moment ago, if you don't receive it for whatever reason, you can get an absentee ballot here and fill it out and send it in. But you have to be registered for it to fly, for it to go.
Absolutely. Right. Correct.
Well, our thanks today to our guest, Mr. Bob Clifton of the U.S. Army Garrison Red Cloud and Area 1's Directorate of Human Resources. What's the Word airs every other Thursday at 3 p.m. here on AFN KCD Eagle. I'm Frank Fisher of the Area 1 Public Affairs Office. I've been your host for What's the Word, handing back now to my What's the Word broadcast partner, AFN KCDJ, Army Staff Sergeant Crystal Crawford. Until next time, thank you for joining us. Here's Sergeant Crawford.
And as Mr. Fisher said, thank you for joining us with this edition of What's the Word, and I'll be right back with your weather exchange rate and gas prices.